Okay, I think we will start. I'm so excited to see all of you and hope that a few more will come. But once again, we'll mention that these are being recorded, as you just saw. So you can tell your friends if you want to review it again or if anybody else wants to see it. I am Marcia Moore, a volunteer with Gateway Science Museum, and once again, delighted to welcome you to this, the second in our spring 2022 lecture series. As we mentioned last week, Gateway's splendid bike exhibit is still on, but only until May 7th. So if you haven't seen it yet, make sure to get over on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. You'll also see the names of lots of physicians who have sponsored the exhibit or helped sponsor the exhibit. Our docs for bike safety, folks who have personal and professional knowledge about the topic. And our fabulous paleo exhibit is also a happening event, and it pays to get a membership so you can see the evolution of the work on these fossils. So we do acknowledge that our Gateway Museum stands on lands originally occupied by the first people of this area, the Mechoopda, and we honor their distinctive spiritual relationship with this land and the waters that run through campus. And now for tonight's special guest. I am delighted and honored to introduce to you my good friend, David Welch. David received his RN and his Bachelor of Science in Nursing from CSU Chico and is now retired after a long career as a cardiac rehabilitation nurse, teaching exercise and healthy behaviors to people with heart disease. He is a lifelong cyclist, has raced on road and track, toured extensively in the American West and in Europe, and ridden for daily transportation for 50 years. He is certified as a league cycling instructor by the League of American Bicyclists. He is committed to the idea that more cycling makes better communities. David.
Thank you, Marcia, for that kind introduction. So before we get into the meat of this evening's talk, I want to sort of show you a vision of what you might call bicycle heaven. And this is not what we live with in our world, but it's what is possible in terms of bicycling. And then we'll come back to talk about how we deal with the world as we have it now. So let's see, there we go. And this is cycling in the Netherlands. All right, I think that's kind of enough to give you the idea. That's what's possible in the world of bicycling, and I certainly want to work towards the day when we can move American cities to something a little bit closer to that than what we have now. But the truth is that despite the fact that we're nowhere near like that, Chico is actually a pretty decent place to ride a bicycle if you know some tricks and techniques to do it. If you were operating in those kinds of conditions that they have in the Netherlands, you wouldn't need any of those tricks and techniques. You just get on and ride like everybody does there. But here we need to know a few things in order to be reasonably safe on the road. I want to say just a couple of prefatory remarks before I get into things a little more. This is just scratching the surface. This is just a beginning of really talking about learning to bicycle safely. The League of American Bicyclists sponsors classes that they call smart cycling classes that go into a great deal more detail than this. But a lot of that material can really only be covered with in-person presence when you actually have a bicycle in your hand, and even when you actually get to get on a bicycle together and get out on the streets and actually see this stuff and experience some of it. So we're going to accomplish about as much as we can in a short time without some of those things, with just the Zoom kind of thing. I think we can still accomplish quite a bit, and hopefully help to make all of you better and more confident cyclists. I'd also say too that while I will state a number of things as kind of like, this is the way it's done, this is the right way to do things, whatever, there are exceptions to every rule, and it's necessary in a lot of situations to kind of exercise independent judgment about how closely you follow these rules that I will give you. Sometimes the exceptions are occasional, and sometimes the exceptions are extremely rare, but there are exceptions to all of these things, and you need to use your own judgment, your own good sense about this. I'll also just say one last sort of prefatory comment that in Chico, I'd throw it pretty much in any place, route choice can make a big difference in your safety level. There's some streets that are easy and safe to ride on, other streets that are more difficult, some intersections that are tricky to cross, things like that. And route choice becomes pretty important. And after more than 40 years of cycling in Chico, I've become pretty good at picking the best route to any place. We've put my email in the chat, and I wouldn't mind at all if anybody wants to contact me with a question about, how do I deal with this situation, or what would be the best route to get from my home to my work, or whatever. I'm happy to help people with stuff like that. And the email is in the chat. I also put in the chat a couple of references. One is the link to the League of American Bicyclists website. It's a great advocacy organization and does a lot of good bike education, as well as advocacy for better conditions for cyclists. And I also put in there, I think, the names of 3 or 4 YouTube channels that have a lot of good stuff on things like smarter street design that makes streets safer for pedestrians and bicyclists and things like that. So the names of those YouTube channels are just there in the chat. You can look those up in the search window on YouTube. So with that, I'm going to once again share screen, and we'll kind of start my little PowerPoint presentation. And I think that should be it. Is everybody seeing that? I think. Yeah. Okay. So just basics of safe and efficient bicycling. Uh-oh. What's happening now? Let's try that again. For some reason, it's not advancing. No, still not advancing. We may have to put up with you seeing the little, I'm not sure why that is happening. It was advancing fine earlier, but let's try this a different way. And share screen, and let's go to this one and share. And now let's see if from current slide, now it advances. But you're seeing the little things down the side and all of that stuff, I imagine. Is that,
yeah, we can see your slides ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm afraid that may be unavoidable, because for some reason when we went to the proper way to do it, let's just try one more time real quickly. We stop share and we share screen again. And now let's see if that advances. Okay, so we ride 3 basic principles. We want to ride legally, we ride visibly, and we ride predictably. Those are the things that will do the most to make you safe. And nope, it still does not advance. So we'll have to go out of it, and we will share again, and we'll come into it this way. And you're just going to have to put up with seeing my you're going to see that little stuff on the side, I guess. So the way we behave on the road as cyclists affects how motorists see us. It affects how they behave around us, and it reflects on all cyclists. So when cyclists behave badly on the road, motorists tend to see us as an illegitimate presence on the road. When we behave well, when we ride legally, predictably, and so on, they tend to see us as fellow legitimate road users. That's kind of an unconscious process, but I think it's a very real process. And so the way in which we behave on the road affects not only how motorists see us as individuals, but how they see cyclists in general. First, before we get into how to ride, just the very, very minimal basics of checking your bike before you go for a ride. Whoops. Want to make sure that your tires are adequately inflated. Again, at a barest minimum, a firm pressure with a thumb like this. There shouldn't be much at all in the way of give there. If the tires are properly inflated, it should feel nice and firm. Better than that is to have a pump with a gauge that you use. Bicycle tires seep some air. That's just a normal part of the process. I need to add air to my bike tires about every week or 10 days, something like that, to keep them properly inflated. And they work better when they're properly inflated. So it's really a good idea to get a pump, and a pump that has a gauge, and somewhere on the sidewall of your tires, it tells you what the proper pressure is.
David, yes. Sorry to interrupt, but you're still on your title slide. If you were trying to advance,
really,
you're keeping yeah.
It's what I'm seeing is advancing, so it's not advancing for you folks.
You're still on slide 1, yeah.
Because I'm seeing it advance. How do we?
Can
you go on the side and click on each one?
I guess maybe I can.
Yeah.
Let's go out of that, and.
Yeah, now it's advancing.
So now you're seeing that brake lever, handlebars. Okay, well, I guess that's the best we can do. Very strange how this thing is behaving. I don't understand that part. I thought we had this all tested out and working. Anyway, so the other sort of bare minimum essential thing to check there, again, if you took a smart cycling class, you would learn more things to check on your bike and a little more about bike maintenance. But a bare minimum thing to check is that your brakes are working. Squeeze the brake lever in, and there should be a good reasonable space between the brake lever and the handlebars. If the brake lever bottoms out against the handlebar, that you're not going to have effective braking. If it comes very close to bottoming out, it might bottom out under hard braking. This is good. A couple of finger widths of space between the lever and the handlebar is pretty good. When it gets closer than that, that's getting a little too close. That requires a little adjustment of the cable to bring that out. There's not a great deal of complicated physical skill in learning to ride safely on a bike, but the one essential physical skill that people do need to learn is the ability to ride in a straight line. Now, riding in a straight line when you're just looking ahead and having both hands on the handlebars isn't very hard, though a lot of people seem to sort of lose track of that, and you see people wandering a bit on the road. Again, that makes you less predictable, a little less respected perhaps by motorists when you wander around on the road, but it also increases your danger really when you're wandering around. So you want to be able to ride a straight line for starters. Then what gets just a little bit harder is being able to ride a straight line when you take a hand off the handlebar to signal a turn. We'll talk about that a little more in a moment. And when you turn around to look to the rear, that's the trickiest part of it. There's a lot of situations where you need to check what's coming up behind you. You need to turn around and look to see if there's a car coming up behind you. And if you take your hands off, if you turn around to look and you veer to the left because you're turning to the left to look, then you're really putting yourself in a dangerous kind of situation. The usual way of looking behind you is just twisting your head around, which for some of us gets harder as we get older. And that still works pretty well. For some people, it works better to turn your whole torso around in this fashion. So letting go of the handlebars with one hand and rotating the whole torso, that actually has less of a tendency to make you veer out of line. It's a little easier to stay straight when you do that once you get used to doing it. If you have trouble with doing that, then or even if you don't have trouble, consider a mirror. Mirrors can be a good idea. There's two basic ways of doing mirrors. One is to have a very small mirror that either attaches to your helmet like this one does, or attaches to the frame of eyeglasses. And same basic concept, they work pretty similarly. Some people prefer one over the other, but it's a very small mirror, 1.5 inches maybe in diameter, something like that, up close to your eye. That's a perfectly reasonable way to do it. Let's see. And the alternative is a mirror on the end of the handlebars. That works best on upright or straight type handlebars. Harder to do this well with drop bars. There are some mirrors that work that way on the racing type drop bars, but they don't work as well. A bar end mirror works a lot better on an upright bar. So mirrors are a good idea. I don't personally use one just because my habits have been established for so long and I'm comfortable enough checking behind me and so on that I haven't really felt the need of a mirror. But I think they can be really valuable for a lot of people. Now we're going to get into bicycle law a bit, and this is where things get interesting. So first off, the bare minimum basics. We ride with traffic, not facing traffic. We stop for stop signs and lights. We ride in the street, not on the sidewalk, and we signal our turns when we're going to make a turn. All right, we'll come back to some of those things as we go along here, but those are just the very basics. Now we get into some things that are just a little more advanced in terms of bicycle law. When you're operating a bicycle on the road, you are legally the operator of a vehicle with the same rights and responsibilities as the operators of any other vehicle, subject to a few special rules. You're not a pedestrian. You don't have the special privileges that pedestrians have on the road. You're the operator of a vehicle, and you need to think. You do best when you think like the operator of a vehicle. Now, one of the big questions, and it's absolutely at the center of what I'm going to talk about here, is the issue of where you ride on the road. And here's what the California Vehicle Code says, and this gets interesting. You ride as far to the right as practicable, not as far to the right as possible, as far to the right as practicable. And then it gives you this lengthy list of exceptions to that, except when reasonably necessary to avoid conditions, including but not limited to fixed or moving objects, vehicles, bicycles, pedestrians, animals, surface hazards, or, and this is the big one here, substandard width lanes that make it unsafe to continue along the right-hand curb or edge. In other words, when any of those conditions exist that make it unsafe for you to continue along the right side of the road, that obligation to be at the right side of the road goes away when those conditions exist that require you to move out to be safer. So most of those are sort of obvious. If something at the edge of the road requires you to move out, okay, that makes sense. Anybody can figure that one. But substandard width lane, what's that mean? Again, from the vehicle code, any lane that is too narrow for a bicycle and a car to safely share the road side by side is a substandard width lane. Now let's just look at an example, a very local example. Some of you will recognize this really easily. This is 4th Street heading from downtown towards Bidwell Park. Can a bicycle and a car safely share that right-hand lane? Nope, no way. There's no possibility of a car safely passing a bicycle within that lane, all right? So that's an example of a substandard width lane that really removes the bicyclist's obligation to be at the far right edge of the lane. Now, how close is too close when we're talking about a motor vehicle passing a bicycle? Once again, from the California Vehicle Code, a motor vehicle passing a bicycle going in the same direction must pass at a safe distance, allowing for speed and conditions, and always at least 3 feet between any part of the motor vehicle and any part of the bicycle or rider. Okay, so if there isn't room for you to have a safe distance from the edge of the road and the car to have 3 feet between you and a car, that lane is too narrow for a car and a bicycle to safely share. The bottom line of all of that is that if the road is too narrow to safely share with 3 feet between, you may and should, what we call in LCI parlance, take the lane, meaning moving out from the edge, out closer to the middle of the lane, making it impossible for a car to unsafely pass you in that overly narrow lane. You don't want to invite motorists to endanger you. Certain kinds of, if you place yourself in the wrong place on the road, you're effectively inviting a motorist to do something dangerous. And let me show you an example or two here. Here's, we all pretty well know where this is, roundabout downtown. The entrance to the roundabout, all the way through the roundabout, it's too narrow for a bicyclist and a car side by side. There is not room for a car to pass a bicyclist in there. But if a bicyclist rides too close to the edge, like this gentleman is, it sort of invites an impatient or irresponsible motorist to try to squeeze by when you ride too close to the edge. So you really don't want to do that. It's inviting trouble. You move out into the middle of the lane where it's clear that there's no possibility of a motorist trying to pass you over there. So the speed of a bicyclist, a normal bicyclist going through that roundabout is just about as fast as the normal speed of a car going through the roundabout. And so you're really not impeding anybody in any significant way when you do that. So as I'm approaching a roundabout like this, I'm checking behind me for an overtaking car. And as long as I have room to safely do it, I'm moving out into the center of the lane and going on through the roundabout there. So now let's look at a couple of other situations. It's another one that's probably familiar. This is 9th Avenue heading from the Esplanade towards Mangrove. Once again, a substandard width lane. There absolutely is not room for a car to leave 3 feet of space between the cyclist and the yellow line out there in the middle. Not possible to do it. But by riding over at the edge of the road like this, she effectively invites a motorist to try to squeeze by. If there's traffic coming in the other direction and you're riding over here, an occasional motorist will in fact try to squeeze through, and it's really not possible to squeeze through safely. So safer. What you're certainly legally entitled to do is move all the way out into the middle of the road like this. Now, I ride this street fairly often, and I don't actually ride quite that far out. I would ride, about midway between those two positions. I would ride right about in the black line here is about where I would ride. This makes it really visually obvious to a motorist that they don't have room to pass you if there's traffic coming the other way. They need to move a little bit across the center line to pass you. and if there's traffic coming the other way, they will wait. But if I'm a little more over to the right like that, long about in here, the motorist tends to sort of visually see that as, oh, this is a bicyclist. They're over near the right-hand side of the road where they should be, or where the motorist thinks they should be, but there isn't room to pass, so I'll wait to pass. I've never had anybody express impatience when I'm riding in about that line, and I've never had anybody try to pass me unsafely when I'm riding on that line. Next, you've probably seen these on the street. These are what are called a share row, having to do with sharing the lane. And what this is sort of an acknowledgement that right out here is the appropriate place for a cyclist to ride on this street. Now, here in this block, you don't need to ride that far out because there aren't any parked cars. But if you were passing the parked cars further down here, this is where you'd need to be, is out here where the share row is. You would need to be just about that far out to the curb to keep yourself out of reach of a suddenly opening car door. We talk about the door zone in this world, the space that would be occupied if someone suddenly opens their car door. You need to be far enough out when you're passing a line of parked cars. You need to be far enough out that if someone suddenly opens the car door, it's not going to hit you. And that can cause really serious injuries and accidents if you suddenly find yourself confronting that suddenly opening door. So you want to be beyond that door zone. Want to be outside of that door zone in order to be safe. The presence of these things on the road or the absence of them really doesn't change anything as far as your rights and where you should ride. If you need to ride this far out to be safe, that's where you should be, regardless of whether these exist or not. But they're kind of a reminder to both motorists and cyclists that that's where you need to be riding. Here's a little bit of an example of a little clearer example where we have the line, we have the opening door, we have where the share row is. This shows you why this is where the cyclist needs to be in that situation. Now, being visible on the road is a whole nother subject. And for starters, there's some things we can do with how we dress and equip ourselves to be more visible. Bright clothing can help. Lights and reflectors at night. And consider daytime running lights. That's increasingly becoming a thing, more and more common, and it's become more and more practical to do with modern technology. When I started riding a bicycle 50 plus years ago, all the lights available for bicyclists were frankly garbage. They didn't produce very much light, and if they were battery powered, the batteries ran down really fast, even for the small amount of light. Nowadays, with LED technology and rechargeable batteries built into the light systems, we can get lights that have long battery life, terribly bright light, and it's really become practical to use daytime running lights. So that's a good thing to consider doing to help make you more visible. Certainly, if you ride at night, lighting becomes a pretty big deal. If you were out walking down the street in the dark and I were to pass you on my bicycle, this is what you would see from behind. I have this extremely bright tail light, very powerful tail light, and I also have a vest with a kind of a light strip on the back of it. It's an amazing little thing, flexible little strip that lights up reasonably well, and that's pretty good. But if you were coming up behind me in a car, then my reflectors come into play and I light up just a whole bunch more. And this is what you would see behind me at night. So I still have the tail light. The reflectorization up here has swamped the lighting strip on the vest. It's still lit, but you don't really see it because the reflectors overpower it. And then I've got these reflectors on my panniers, on my vest, on my little tool bag that I carry, all heavily reflectorized. So reflectors are a great thing. And again, reflectors today are better than they've ever been, so they really show up brightly. And that, I think, if you're riding at all after dark, and if you're riding for transportation in a practical way, you do need to ride some after dark. So those are lots of reflectorization is a very good thing. But beyond how you dress and how you equip yourself, there's other things you can do to be more or less visible. At the edge of the road, there's a lot of visual clutter. Shadows, parked cars, trash cans waiting to be collected, trees, all kinds of stuff that may be over there at the side of the road. And so if a motorist coming in from a side street is looking for traffic coming down this way, it's pretty easy for them to miss a bicyclist who's hugging the edge of the road. The motorist is conditioned to look out in the middle of the road because that's where they expect sources of danger to come from. So it's really easy, again, if you're hugging the edge of the road, it's easy for a motorist to miss you. So you're actually, again, more visible and safer if you move out a little bit farther, not way out into the traffic lane, not enough to impede traffic, but a little bit further out so that you're a little more visible is actually safer. A lot of people's natural tendency, what we naturally tend to think of, cars are big and scary, we want to be as far away from them as possible, that's the way to be safest. But it's actually not the way to be safest. You're safer if you get a little bit further out from the edge of the road. And surprisingly enough, I find with my years of experience, when I'm a little further out, cars actually give me more space than when I'm hugging the edge of the road, strangely enough. Now, looking at it from behind, this picture's a little deceptive. The camera angle makes it look like she's further out in the road than she is. If you look carefully, you would see that there's one of those painted share rows right under her wheels there. She's riding just far enough out to miss an opening door from this SUV, and she's out there where she's pretty visible, pretty easy to see. By contrast, someone who's hugging the curb before they get to the parked car, a little less visible over there because of the cars and so on in the background, and has to make a sudden move out to go around the car, which tends to lead to not moving far enough out to be safely out of reach of an opening door. So you're really better off to ride a little further out. Now, if I'm on a street like this is Neil Dow Avenue here, right by Neil Dow School. If I'm riding down the street, which I do almost every day, and if there's long stretches between parked cars, I'm going to be roughly most of the way, I'm going to ride about where the left-hand wheels of the car are most of the way, so I'm not at all impeding traffic. But then well before I get to that parked car, I'm going to be gradually moving out so that I'm out beyond the door zone as I'm actually passing the parked car. Next, again, we talked about ride legally, ride visibly, and ride predictably. So again, being predictable is another critical part of it. One part of that obviously is using your hand signals to signal your intentions. So you're going to make a left turn, obvious left turn signal. There's actually two options for right turn. We have the old traditional motorist's hand signal using the left hand up like so. That was, of course, designed for someone driving a car in the days before cars had turn signals, is where that originates. For a bicyclist, then it's perfectly acceptable to also use the right hand to make a right hand turn signal. That in many ways makes better sense. Some people still do this. Both are legally acceptable as right turn signals in California. And then a stop signal, hand down and out at an angle a bit with the palm facing backwards, is generally a signal that you're stopping. I mostly use this if I'm riding in a line of cars, if I'm out in traffic in a line of cars, or if I'm riding with other bicyclists. That's the primary way I do this. So when you're going to make again, being predictable, you're going to make, say, a move to the left, you're going to change lanes, you want to move out to the left to make a left turn or something like that. You want to signal your intentions, you scan to the rear, you turn to look behind you, you see that it's clear, then you go ahead and signal. Here's another, I'm like to catch some of the trickier intersections around Chico. This is one, again, everybody will recognize. Morning Thunder Cafe is there in the background. The Wells Fargo Bank is just out of sight to the right. And there's this little narrow lane off here to the right that is a bike lane to the right of this island with the trees on it. And some bicyclists go over that way. That would take you to the Gateway Science Museum if you went that way. And but a lot of people, if you want to go downtown, you're going to curve left. And here we have this sort of tricky situation because we have a single lane of car traffic that then suddenly splits into two, one of which makes right turns. And a significant number of cars head right directly for that right-hand turn lane here. So what I generally do is, even before I get to the point where this dotted line for the bicycle starts to diverge, even before I get there, I've moved a little bit out of the bike lane. I'm showing that I'm catching a motorist's attention. And as I get to this point, I'm signaling that I'm going to make that curve to the left. I'm making it clear that I'm going to make that curve to the left. Again, it's all about being predictable in how you ride. One of the trickier things for a lot of people to do successfully is to make a left turn with a bicycle, because of course we're told we ride over to the right most of the time. So how do we go about safely making a left turn from that? Here's the good standard conventional way to do it. And then I'll give you a couple of other options. So starting here, you look down here at the bottom of this image where the number 1 is, starting about the time I'm there, as I'm approaching this intersection, I'm going to be turning around to scan behind me, looking for oncoming traffic. By the time I get to 2, assuming that I've seen it's clear, by the time I get to the number 2 there, I've got my arm out in a signal, and then I am moving over to the left to position myself for the left turn. I want to be pretty much as close as possible to the center line to make that left turn, proceeding across the intersection. Now you'll notice a car would make a little more of a smooth curve around here and probably come into the closest lane. But we on a bicycle really don't want to end up in the closest lane. We want to end up over by the right-hand side of the road. So I'm going to go straight a little longer than a motorist would before I make my curve to the left and end up coming out of the turn over here at the far side. Now, sometimes there are situations where the speed and density of the traffic is pretty intense. I turn around to look and it's like, ooh, there's a lot of cars coming. They're coming pretty fast. I'm feeling a little concerned about making the left turn. In that situation, my simple approach is I will just pull to the right side of the road and stop. Right over at the right-hand edge of the road and stop, where I can stand there and wait until I see a good, big, clear gap in the traffic. And then I go ahead and make this maneuver out to the center of the road and make the left turn. And that for me works very well. And then there is a third alternative, and that is you can do a 2-stage left turn, which basically is you just proceed straight across the intersection at the right-hand side to the far corner. You stop there, turn your bicycle 90 degrees, and you wait until the lights and or traffic situation make it appropriate, and then you proceed across this way, right straight across the intersection that way. So if you're uncomfortable making a left turn this way, you can always fall back on that one. That's something, I don't think I've ever actually done that, but I definitely have done the maneuver of stopping at the side of the road and waiting until I have a good clearance to do it. The kinds of times I'm most likely to do that are places like on the upper Esplanade, for example, where the traffic is moving pretty fast and I've got 2 lanes of fairly high speed traffic. I will do that fairly commonly. So again, you scan to the rear, you signal, then you move out towards the left side of the lane, and you go ahead and you make your turn. Intersection strategies. We've got some really complicated intersections. A basic principle to start with is choose the farthest right lane that is going where you are going. But usually that's not right at the curb unless you're turning right. The reason for that in most situations is that there's quite likely to be cars turning right. And you don't really want, if you're going straight, you really don't want to be on the right-hand side of cars that are turning right. So let's show you an example here. Here we have, this is, again, most of you will recognize this probably, 5th and Mangrove. We're heading eastbound at 5th and Mangrove. Now, these 2 bicyclists arrive, whoops, there we go. I'm going to be careful here. The 2 bicyclists arrived at this intersection when the light was red and there was a line of cars waiting. It's obviously very tempting. You see there's space to the right of the line of cars. It's very tempting to just roll right up to the front there. The problem with doing that in this situation is, say you're halfway up that line and the light turns green and the cars start to move, and some of those cars are going to turn right. And there you are once again, you're on the right side of cars that are turning right, and that's not really a place you want to be. So in this situation, it's actually safer to go ahead and just join the line of cars, ride out through the intersection with the line of cars, and as you're getting to the far side of the intersection, then you're transitioning over towards the right side of the road, out of the line of cars, where you generally want to be riding. Let me show you another tricky intersection here. And once again, we're back to, this is Vallombrosa and Mangrove. And again, familiar intersection to probably everybody here almost. And this has, in all four directions, it has this very interesting feature of what are called slip lanes. The slip lane, if you look, Becky, the bicyclist there, if you look just beyond and to the right of where she is, you'll see the island out there. And then to the right of the island is this little curving lane that is allows motorists to make a right turn without really slowing down all that much. Slip lanes are great for keeping traffic moving, but they're not really great for pedestrian and bicycle safety. Now, remember what I said, don't invite motorists to do something that will endanger you. See where Becky's riding over here at the right-hand side of the road, and you notice the black car that's just coming into the frame at the left-hand side. We got lucky here in that we actually, the motorist actually cooperated, you might say, by illustrating for us exactly why it's a problem to be over here. That same car cut right across her path to make his right turn. And she essentially, by being over there at the far right edge, she invited that. Okay, so what's better? Now here's Billy. She's riding she's a little further back. She's in the bike lane. But you notice the bike lane line ends. She's at the left edge of the bike lane out there where she's nice and visible. There's lots of road space to the left. The road's very wide here, so there's lots of room. She's not at all in conflict with cars by being out there. And as the line ends, she stays well out from the curb, and now she isn't inviting motorists to make that right turn across her path. She's essentially cutting off that possibility. And so a motorist coming up behind her is going to wait until she clears that space, and she's going to come up there and stop. Now, this is a case, as I've said, you generally don't want to stop right at the curb if you're going straight, but this is a case where if the light's red when you get there, stopping right next to that little island is probably the smart place to be, right out here. That's about where she would stop, because here's a right turn lane, so she's not going to be crossed up with cars turning right there. So if she's going straight, that's about where she wants to be. Now, same intersection. We're actually coming at it from the other direction now. We're facing towards the post office. Notice this interesting thing. We've got a lane that only turns left, and we've got a lane that can either turn left or go straight. So how do you turn left here? That's kind of an interesting, tricky one. And the answer is you get out into the line of cars, once again, to turn left. You can't turn left from up here where Billy is, because if you do, many of these cars are going straight. You can't turn left across that line of cars going straight. You have to get out here into this lane. You don't want to be in the far left lane, because that's going to cause you to finish up in the left lane after you've made your turn, and you really don't want to be over there. You want to be in the right hand of the two left turn lanes, and you want to cruise around that. And then as you come out of the turn, once again, move over towards the edge of the road and relatively close to the curb and finish up over there. So pretty straightforward process. But for a lot of people, it's just the idea of getting out there into that line of cars seems scary, but it's actually the safest thing you can do in that situation. You're obvious, you're visible, the motorists know you're there, and it's by far the safest way to do some of these kinds of maneuvers, is to join the traffic and become part of that traffic flow. Now, This is kind of an interesting subject that I throw in here. This doesn't seem like it's a safety issue, but it really is. And it's fascinating to me that I would say the vast majority of cyclists that I encounter really don't get some aspects of this. So, first off, some lights are on timers, and that's easy. Now here in Chico, the Esplanade, downtown corridor, and so on, those lights are generally on timers from 9th Avenue and Esplanade all the way through downtown and down, I think, as far as 18th Street down on Park Avenue. All of those lights are on timers. They're going to change on schedule no matter what anybody does. There's no need for anything to happen to activate those lights. Most of the other lights in town are in one way or another traffic activated. They're activated, their default position is to be green for the more major street, and they require some sort of activation to get a green light for the cross street. So for example, if you're crossing First Avenue, for example, East First Avenue, at places like Sheridan or at Neil Dow or any place like that, those lights all have to be activated in some way. You have to do something to make the light change. The first thing to say about that, which again, a lot of bicyclists don't get, if there's already a car there waiting for the light to change, then the presence of the car is going to trigger the light to change. You don't need to do anything about it. I frequently see there's a car waiting there for a light to change. A bicyclist will ride up. There's a button over at the side of the road the bicyclist can push, and they go over there and start pushing the button. There's really no need for doing that. The car is going to activate the light. But if you arrive there by yourself, then there's a number of different ways, depending on the intersection, to change the light. These marks show the location of a in-pavement sensor that changes the light. These are designed for cars, but the overwhelming majority of them, with very few exceptions here in Chico, will respond to a bicycle. You can ride your bicycle right up this center line and stop on this center line, and you will activate the light at almost all of the intersections in Chico that have this kind of a trigger. Now, there are some intersections where they put the trigger in and then they've repaved it since, and you can't see where the trigger is, but a great many of them you can. And if you can find where that center line is, or you can even sort of guess where that center line is, you can generally get it to trigger. But you'll notice you are not going to trigger that from over here at the curb. You need to be out there in the road to trigger that. Here's an example where they've put a bicycle marker on there, but whether the marker, it's exactly the same device, whether the marker's there or not, a bicycle will generally trigger one of these. Again, some of them are more sensitive than others, and I encounter one occasionally that I don't seem to be able to trigger with my bicycle. But by and large, these are all sensitive enough for a bicycle to activate them. Whoops. Now, whoops, let's come down here. Okay, now you see this a lot. There's a fair number of intersections that have these. Push the button to cross the street. I use this as a last resort. This is what I use when there isn't any other good way to get the light to change, because if I'm going straight, again, for reasons I've already said, if I'm going straight at this intersection, I really don't want to be right over at the curb where you have to be to push this button, because I may have a car pull up next to me that wants to turn right. And then I have a potential conflict between me going straight and a car to the left of me that's turning right. So I'd really rather not use this button in most cases. I do use them sometimes, but they're not my first choice if I have another good option. Now, this is a fun thing. You'll see these around on some intersections. And lots of people believe that these are a red light camera that are there to catch people running a red light. To the best of my knowledge, there are no red light cameras in Chico. These are a replacement for the in-pavement sensors. They're a visual sensor that sees an object pull up there waiting for the light to change, and they respond to that. So they're not a red light camera. I'm actually sort of happy to have people think that they are, because maybe that reduces the number of people running red lights, but they're there to change the light. The trick about these things, once again, is that for for you on your bicycle to activate one of these, you really want to be pretty close to the center of its field of view. That's very easy to see. As you approach it, you can look up at it, you can see, oh, this thing's focused right about here, right where I am. If you're in the center of view of its field of view, it's very obvious that you are. And most of the intersections that I know of, I think probably all the intersections I can think of that have one of these on them, they basically have two lanes. There's a lane to go straight and a lane to turn left. And where this thing is focused is right on the line between those two lanes. So if you want to activate this thing, if you're going straight, you want to be kind of at the left-hand edge of the straight lane. If you're going to turn left, you want to be at the right-hand edge of the lane that's turning left. You don't want to be over at the curb because it's not going to see you over at the curb. Generally, you kind of need to move out there into the road once again to get these things to see you. Most of the cross streets crossing East Avenue have these. Quite a few other places around town have them. You look around, you'll notice them. And they once again, they'll see a bicycle just fine as long as you're in the right place, but they won't see you when you're right over against the curb. And then I'm going to I'm going to close here with a couple of things about driving safely around cyclists. And the two things that I want to focus on most are things that I encounter in my own everyday riding pretty much. Obviously, you've gained enough here, things like leaving adequate space when passing a cyclist and things like that. But let's talk about a couple things that are trickier. Here's the California Vehicle Code on making a right turn. This applies obviously to everybody, cars and bicycles both. The approach for a right-hand turn and a right-hand turn shall be made as close as practicable to the right-hand curb or edge of the roadway. Okay, now hold that thought and let's look at this. Again, very close to my house. Got the bike lane marker over to the edge of the road, and as it approaches an intersection, and pretty much every intersection, you'll see this happen, it becomes a dashed line. That's not an accident. There's a meaning to that. And what that meaning is that as long as it's clear and as long as it's safe to do so, a motorist making a right turn can and should move over near the right-hand edge of the road and make the turn from the edge of the road just as if the bike lane wasn't there. By the same token, if there's a motorist up there waiting to make a right turn, the bicyclist, it's appropriate for a bicyclist to move out of the bike lane and pass the motorist on the left, just as it makes good sense. If you're passing someone making a right turn, you want to pass them on the left. So this means basically this opens this bike lane to movement in and movement out as long as it's safe to do so. Now, let me describe a situation that happens to me pretty frequently. I'm on a through street, no stop signs, anything like that. I'm approaching an intersection. A motorist passes me. Their right turn signal is on. They're positioned out near the center line, out in the middle of the road. They get to the intersection and they come to a full stop. Now, I'm about 90% sure that that motorist has seen me and is stopping because they're waiting for me to pass them before they make their right turn. But I'm not 100% sure of that. It may well be that they're just sitting there because they haven't decided whether they're going to make a turn or not. They haven't seen me at all, and I would get there and go to pass them on the right just as they accelerate and decide to make their right turn and turn straight into me. That certainly has happened. Years ago, I had a kind of a close call with something like that many years ago. And so that definitely can happen. So I don't pass on the right of a car signaling a right turn. Somebody stops out there in the middle of the road with their right turn signal on, and I'm over here. I stop and wait, which totally baffles them. They can't figure out why I'm not passing on the right, but I'm not going to pass on the right of a car making a right turn. So the right way to do it, the proper way to do it, if you're in that situation, you're overtaking a cyclist and you want to make a right turn, you got two good choices. first. You judge the speed of the cyclist, you judge the distance to the intersection. It's just like you were passing a car on a road with 2 lanes and you wanted to move over to make a right turn. If you have plenty of time to cleanly pass the cyclist, get well past them, you then move over to the right-hand side of the road and go right ahead without stopping and make your turn. That allows, if for some reason you get balked in the process, that allows the cyclist to pass you on your left. Alternatively, if you aren't completely confident that you have time to pass the cyclist cleanly before you get there, and you're going to wait for the cyclist to clear the intersection before you make your turn, you slow down and you wait behind them, not wait in front of them. Okay, so that's one. The other little situation I want to mention is yielding the right of way. Once again, as I said back at the beginning, cyclists are not pedestrians and don't have a pedestrian's special privileges. If you're going down the road and you see at an intersection that a pedestrian is waiting to cross the street, trying to get across the street, you have something of an obligation to stop and allow them to cross. You don't have that obligation for a bicyclist. And in general, it's actually safer and better for everyone if you don't. If you have the right of way and the road is clear and you're just driving along at normal speed on a clear road, whoops, you're better off to just go ahead and go and not stop and wave that motorist through. Once again, personal experience. This is just something that happened to us about 10 days ago. We're out on the tandem bike and we're waiting to cross a fairly major street. Not a lot of traffic, but there's a motorist coming from the left and no traffic in sight behind that motorist. And as they approach the intersection, they slow down and stop and are waving me through. Now, it would have been very easy for me to be distracted by the fact that this person was waving me through, but I was alert enough to notice that there was a car coming from the other direction that was going at a high rate of speed and had no intention of stopping. So, of course, I waited until that car had cleared the intersection before I went. But someone I knew well, a former coworker and friend, died in a similar situation. She was driving a car, not riding a bike, but waiting to cross a major street. A motorist waved her through. A motorist who had the right of way stopped and waved her through. That distracted her enough that she didn't notice the other car coming at a high rate of speed that hit her and killed her. So generally speaking, in situations like that, you're really better if you have the right of way to just go ahead and go and let the cyclist wait until they have a clear opportunity to cross the street normally. Obviously, if there's situations, like when you have a dense, steady line of traffic crawling along and somebody's kind of trying to get out of a driveway or something, or out of a side street to join that line of traffic, then it's a nice, courteous thing to do to yield the right of way and let them in. But mostly for crossing a street, you need to be really thoughtful about whether you're doing that or not. And usually it's generally safer for everybody if you have the right of way to just go ahead and go. And the same thing applies at a four-way stop. If it's your turn to go at the four-way stop and you see a cyclist who's coming up to the four-way stop and they're slowing to a stop, then you should go ahead and go rather than wave them through, because it just creates confusion if it's your turn to go and you don't go. Now, we all know that there are some cyclists who are just going to blow through that intersection, some undisciplined people who are just going to do that, but it's pretty easy to tell the difference between somebody who's going to do that and somebody who's appropriately slowing to the stop. So, and in general, if the cyclist is slowing to a stop the way they should, it's better for you to go ahead. You don't have the obligation to treat them as a pedestrian. It's better to treat them just as the operator of another vehicle and go ahead and go. So that is it for me. And I'm
David, there's
now
time for applause. I just,
Zoom.
well, thank you for all of us for such a very clear and thorough presentation. And as we've said for other, and I didn't exactly say at the beginning, but if anyone has questions or comments, if you'd put them in the chat function, and I have a couple of comments, I really very clear. And not only that, the fact that you had pictures of Chico. I mean, that's a lot of work, but it really brings it all home. And then another comment is that I was watching as much from the point of view throughout the whole talk. And I feel like these are classes that every driver should go through, because I'm sure, you know, having driven for 50 years and not ridden that much, that there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know. And as long as we know the rules of the road, you know, then we know what to expect.
Right.
So,
And, you know, and frankly, that's one of the reasons why cycling in the Netherlands is so safe, besides all their infrastructure and stuff, is that when they do encounter a motorist, because literally everyone there rides a bike, everyone who they encounter driving a car is also a cyclist. So that person driving a car understands what cyclists need and how to drive around cyclists. So it makes that's part of the reason why it's so safe there.
and while we're still waiting for questions, you might not have this, but do you know the percentage of accidents, fatal or not, in the Netherlands compared to the United States? And I'm sure it differs from urban.
I don't
to
actually know. I've never tried to dig out those statistics. I will say, by the way, I do know a little statistics. I don't know raw numbers, but in terms of relative statistics, most accidents, people worry about an overtaking collision, being hit from behind by a car. That's actually rare. Most collisions between a motorist and a bicyclist happen at intersections, and they're frankly about 50-50 between the motorist as far as who didn't yield the right of way, who was supposed to yield the right of way and didn't. It's about 50-50 between the motorist and the cyclist in those situations. But those are by far, it's one or the other failing to yield the right of way when they should, is the it's somebody who running a red light, running a stop sign, or a motorist turning in front of a cyclist is often one of the more frequent situations. And I saw something pop up, any tips for riding in the rain? First off, of course, visibility becomes more of a problem there. Fenders on the bike make a huge difference in the rain, because a lot of water comes up from the road on a bike that doesn't have fenders on it. So the tires throw a lot of water up. The front tire throws water up in your face. The back tire throws water up on your back. And so just having fenders can reduce the amount of water that's impacting you. And otherwise, it is basically good rain gear and more attention than usual to visibility. This is where the daytime running lights and stuff really come into play to try to make yourself as visible as possible. One of the things that I've finally found that's really nice is I have a rain jacket with a hood, and the hood is tight fitting enough and thin enough that I can put my helmet on over the hood, and that holds the hood in place on my head. If you have a hood that goes over your helmet, when you turn your head to look to one side or look behind you, you tend to turn your head in the hood. But if you have a hood where you can put your helmet on over the hood, then the hood turns with you as you turn your head, and that makes it much easier to work. And then the final one is, it just seems like it's impossible to keep shoes dry when you're riding in the rain. So when I used to ride my bike to work in the rain, I would take along a spare pair of shoes in a plastic bag, and because I could keep everything else dry with rain gear, but I couldn't keep my feet dry. And so carrying a spare pair of shoes was really helpful.
Great. Yeah, I have not seen any more questions, and I think we are after the 8 o'clock hour. So
yes, we are just.
I will once again thank you and thank everyone for coming. Thanks, Adrienne and her staff, the Gateway staff, and the Community Advisory Board, who really helped make these possible, as well as our co-sponsor, North State Public Radio. And so just a reminder, next week we will be here. Next Wednesday, we have a very interesting and important talk coming up. Angela Harder-Alger on nutrition for physically active lifestyles. She's going to cover the science of body metabolism and how popular eating patterns may affect energy levels and exercise performance. So we're just getting everybody tuned up for biking season. Once again, David, thank you, and thanks all for coming.
It was great fun. A pleasure.
Great. Thank you.